I am furious on behalf of people who expect their leaders to be moral anchors, not carnival barkers selling fear. A place of worship in Manchester was attacked. People were murdered while praying. Families are grieving. Our country shuddered. There is no rhetorical gymnastics that can make that less raw, less real, less tragic. We grieve, we act, we investigate, we hunt the perpetrators. That is the non-negotiable. But grief is not a license for political theatre. Weakness in the face of terrorism only brings more terrorism, then sliding into a swipe at Britain and its leaders. That's the move. It's loud, it's ugly, it's opportunistic. It's also, frankly, contemptible. When a leader who presides over a government that has been dogged by international scrutiny on conduct in conflict zones chooses to frame a massacre on our soil as proof of British weakness, you're not hearing policy critique, and you're hearing deflection. Weakness breeds terror, he says. That sounds like an axiom until you realize what it actually does. It flips the moral script, so the victims and those who question policy become the guilty party, and the man with the button gets to say, "See, I was right." That is rhetorical cowardice disguised as ironclad logic. We will not accept that, not for a second, because to accept it is to hand murderers the moral punchline and give leaders an excuse to dodge accountability. If you want to lecture us about strength, then first demonstrate the humility to submit yourself to scrutiny. If independent agencies and investigators raise alarm bells, the courageous response is to investigate and correct, not to shout louder and blame anyone who dares to ask questions. That's how decent governance works. That is not how propaganda does. Understand the mechanics here. There are two simultaneous ugly plays in motion. Play 1, the immediate moral grandstanding. Look at us, we're tough. Play 2, the strategic silencing. Don't scrutinize what we did. The first is PR, the second is preservation. Both protect power, both stream on the same channel, and both use grief as their prop. That's why this isn't merely political bluster. It is an assault on the public's right to demand the truth, and we will not be gaslit into meekness. Let's be blunt about the context, because nuance matters, and nuance is exactly what these people try to steal when their rhetoric collapses into sloganeering. The Manchester attack, 2 people killed, others wounded, was awful and deliberate, an assault on Jewish life in Britain. Keir Starmer and other UK leaders condemned it, promised protection, and urged vigilance against anti-Semitic violence. That's the duty of any responsible state, to defend communities under threat. But this is not about disputing the need for protection. It's about moral license. Using that tragedy to say the UK's democratic processes or choices caused an attack is to blame the victims and absolve attackers. It's to trade the hard job of addressing root causes and security in favour of a soundbite. To every grieving family, that's offensive. To every honest policymaker, that's dangerous. And here's where hypocrisy sharpens the blade. Across the last months and years, there have been persistent international criticisms and independent reports probing conduct during military operations and blockades. Those reports do not exist to humiliate. They exist to hold power to account and prevent future harm. When those findings point to failures or breaches, the right response is not to call critics weak and double down. It is to engage with facts, accept responsibility where due, and change course. If you instead wrap yourself in a flag and flame anyone who asks questions, you're not defending your nation. You're defending impunity. Let's dispel a tactic deployed by leaders who want moral immunity. Reduce everything to a false binary. Either you are with us in absolute support, or you are the enabler of violence. That's lazy logic. It's also immoral. The political theatre that forces democracies to choose between no criticism or you cause terror is cowardice's greatest trick. Free societies survive because they can have both security and criticism. They can protect citizens while interrogating the methods used to do so. Rejection of criticism is not strength, it's fragility wrapped in bluster. And before anyone tries to paint this as an us versus them culture war, calling for accountability is not betrayal. It is civic responsibility. Want safety? Fine. Demand rigorous intelligence, better policing, and effective community protection. Want morality? Fine. Demand that force is used lawfully and proportionately, and that civilians are protected. If a leader can't face those questions without crying weakness, then their rhetoric is a thin shield for policy failure. There is also a strategic element to this performative outrage. Publicly blaming another democracy after a terror attack has tactical effects. It chills debate abroad, it rallies a certain base at home, and it attempts to recast the narrative away from any uncomfortable scrutiny. Say something big, make the headlines, ensure the story is about your moral sermon rather than the specifics of operations or investigations. It's diversion by volume. Now, that's a classic in the authoritarian playbook, not a democratic leadership manual, and we should call it for what it is. We must also address the emotional warfare this plays on citizens. When a leader frames critique as an invitation to terror, they weaponize fear. Suddenly, any citizen who questions policy is painted as soft on security, or worse, accomplice to violence. That's how public debate dies, not with a bang, but with 1,000 small shames. If you want democratic resilience, you cultivate debate and investigation. If you want autocratic comfort, you silence it. Let me be clear. We unequivocally condemn the Manchester attackers. There's no moral relativism here. There is only unwavering hate for any act that slaughters worshippers. But condemnation does not suspend our brains. It shouldn't suspend our rights. It shouldn't suspend inquiry. If you pretend brutality ends when you shout louder than your critics, you're not preventing the next atrocity. You're guaranteeing it by refusing to learn. And make no mistake, asking for inquiry is not a diplomatic slight. It is the only credible way to preserve moral standing when allegations pile up. If there are legitimate concerns about how any country conducts its operations, formal investigations are how truth emerges. A leader with nothing to hide should welcome those investigations because transparency is the best inoculation against both genuine wrongdoing and rumours. The idea that investigation equals weakness is upside-down logic. Courage looks like a willingness to be tested. Cowardice hides behind invective. There's an additional layer here that adds insult to injury. The rhetorical privilege of moral monotony. Powerful leaders get to choose the narrative cadence, the timing, the emphasis, the moral frame. If they use every tragedy to rehearse the same sermon, be tougher, be harder, never doubt me, they cheapen grief and ossify policy. Leaders should evolve. If patterns show civilian harm or failed strategy, adapt. If attacks persist, accept the hard tasks, change tactics, recalibrate intelligence, rebuild trust with communities. You don't fix terror by declaring the world a simpler morality play. You fix it by doing the painstaking, often boring work of governance. Now, to those who will say this is merely political, why pick a fight? Because words from power matter. When a prime minister with global sway declares that weakness breeds terror, he's offering a policy mantra that can justify escalation without oversight. We saw how slogans like that can be used to normalize harsh measures that strip rights and access to due process. We've watched democratic backsliding begin not with coups, but with steady rhetorical erosion. Fellow citizens taught to fear nuance, institutions softened, oversight ridiculed. If you want the future to keep being democratic, you fight the corrosion early, with argument, with evidence, and with public will. There's a simple test for leadership. When confronted with both tragedy and criticism, do you protect your people and preserve democratic norms? Or do you protect your power and weaponize both grief and patriotism to silence critics? The right answer should be obvious. Real leadership absorbs pain, responds with action, and invites scrutiny because it trusts itself. Lesser leadership seeks comfort in applause and the illusion of infallibility. We should also demand better language from allies. Sincere solidarity comes with honesty. If you say, "we grieve with you," then your subsequent rhetorical behavior should align. Offer resources, intelligence cooperation, and shared strategies, not sermonize. If you want Britain to be tough, then help make Britain safer in ways that withstand scrutiny, fund intelligence exchange, support community policing, help with social cohesion initiatives. That's solidarity. Moralizing from afar, that's theatre. Finally, let me be direct to the man who chose to lecture our nation. Words without accountability echo hollow. If you are concerned about weakness, show it by allowing independent probes where questions persist. If you claim that strength builds security, demonstrate how your policies reduce violence without harming innocent civilians. If you are going to brandish morality, be prepared to answer for your own. Otherwise, you're just a preacher with a megaphone, and preachers don't get to write policy for others. This is not the time for pettiness. This is the time for clarity. We will not be shamed into silence. We will not allow grief to be used as a diplomatic cudgel. We will grieve. We will investigate. We will hold perpetrators to account. And we will make sure that leaders who point fingers also point to their own records. If you want to teach us about strength, start by showing us how to be better. Strength that shuts down questions is not protection, it's a prison. Strength that invites accountability is the only strength worth having. And let your deeds answer your words. Not right, not left, just real.